The desert stretches endlessly, a sea of gold under the harsh blaze of the sun. From a distance, the shapes seem like mirages, ridges of stone breaking the horizon. But as you draw closer, the illusion dissolves into something far stranger, colossal walls, unfinished and unweathered, rising abruptly from the earth. They end just as suddenly as they begin, their edges sharp as though cut only yesterday. Towers stand frozen in partial ascent, their upper tiers never completed. Stairways climb partway skyward before halting in midair, leading to platforms that were never built. It is a city, but not in the way we understand cities. It has streets that run perfectly straight for hundreds of meters, then stop without warning. Foundations laid for vast plazas, yet no signs of the markets, fountains, or temples that should have followed. Everything here whispers of momentum interrupted, a grand project halted in its earliest breath. The air is still, no birds nest in these walls, no weeds grow between the perfectly aligned stone blocks. Here there is no sign of the slow hand of time reclaiming what was built. Instead, it feels as if time itself skipped over this place, leaving it in the exact condition it was on the day the last worker walked away. According to the accepted historical narrative, this was an ambitious settlement that failed before completion, a project conceived with vision but doomed by miscalculation, its leaders overestimating resources, manpower, or political stability. The textbooks call it a casualty of logistics, another forgotten entry in the long ledger of human hubris. But the stones suggest something else. They tell of precision and care. Each block is cut with exactitude, its edges fitting seamlessly with its neighbor. There are no signs of frantic abandonment, no unfinished cuts left jagged, no tools scattered in chaos. Instead, the work appears deliberate right up to its sudden stop, as though the entire city was commanded to pause, and the command was obeyed without question. Local folklore, passed quietly from generation to generation, speaks of a city that went silent overnight. Villagers say their ancestors avoided this place, claiming it was cursed not by war or plague, but by something nameless. Official historians dismiss these tales as superstition, useful only for understanding rural imaginations. Yet the same elders who tell them also know details about the city's layout and purpose that align uncannily with modern archaeological surveys. There is a peculiar absence here, one that troubles even seasoned researchers. In most abandoned sites, layers of occupation tell the story of a place's life and death, the early expansion, the flourishing years, the decline, the scavenging by later settlers. But here there is only one layer. Construction in progress, no signs of repurposed buildings, no burn marks, no looting. The raw materials lie untouched, as though guarded by something more effective than walls. And so the first mystery confronts us, if not by disaster, if not by defeat, what force could stop a city mid-birth? And why would no one in the centuries that followed dare to finish what had been started? From the air, the city's skeleton reveals a meticulous design. Wide avenues radiate outward from what appears to be a central ceremonial platform. Blocks of uniform size suggest modular planning, as though the builders intended rapid expansion. The surrounding terrain is strikingly strategic, elevated enough to avoid flooding, yet close to a river that would have supported agriculture and transport. By every practical measure, this location should have flourished, and yet it didn't. The historical record is silent on its name. No inscriptions have been found naming a ruler, patron, or a founding date. No surviving text marks its existence in the archives of neighboring power. It is as if this place was built without witnesses, or built with the intention that no one outside would know. To scholars, this absence is frustrating. To those drawn to the stranger edges of history, it is an invitation. Standing among the walls, the scale of the effort is undeniable. Tens of thousands of laborers would have been required to move such massive stones, quarry them from distant cliffs, transport them, and align them with such accuracy. This was no experiment. This was the work of a people who knew what they were doing, and had done it before. Which raises the question, if they had the knowledge and skill to begin, what stripped them of the will to finish. The sun shifts, and shadows sharpen against the stone. The silence here is oppressive, as if sound itself hesitates. You might imagine hearing the faint echo of chisels, the scrape of rope over wood, voices calling across scaffolding, but they are only ghosts of possibility. What happened here is hidden, not in what remains, but in the gap between what began and what never came to be. Modern archaeology offers explanations rooted in logic: a collapse in leadership, a failed harvest, a shift in trade routes that made the site economically untenable. These are reasonable answers, tidy enough to close the case, but they are answers that fit anywhere. The stones here feel resistant to such easy conclusions. They stand as if waiting for a truth that does not fit into the known patterns of rise and fall. Some researchers, careful to couch their theories in cautious language, admit the evidence is strange. Soil samples show no sign of prolonged habitation, no ash from hearths, no food waste, no organic debris. It is as if the builders never lived here while they built. The idea seems absurd, yet the absence of everyday traces makes it difficult to ignore. This city, if it can be called that, feels like a promise unkept, a vision that reached across decades or centuries, then stopped short, leaving behind only its outline. And in that outline we can read a story of human ambition, but also something more elusive. The wind carries fine grains of sand into the gaps between stones, the horizon wavers. From far away the site could be mistaken for a ruin destroyed by time. But up close it is clear this is not the wreckage of something that lived and died. This is the skeleton of something that was never alive. And so we begin, standing in the middle of this unfinished dream, caught between the history we are told and the one the stones insist upon. One story says this city failed before it began. The other asks us to consider that perhaps it was never meant to be finished at all. The city's existence might have remained a silent secret of the desert if not for a chance encounter in the late 19th century. A small team of European explorers, chasing the fading trails of ancient trade routes, stumbled upon the site during an expedition that was already going badly. They were thirsty, half lost, and seeking the shade of rock formations when they crested a dune and saw, spread out before them, the unfinished city. In their official reports to museums and academic societies, they wrote in restrained language. The phrases are familiar: remnants of an abandoned settlement, foundations of uncompleted structures, evidence of halted construction. They presented it as an archaeological curiosity, one of many such sites where ambition and reality had failed to meet. The world received it as a footnote, interesting but hardly sensational. Yet the private diaries of those same men tell a different story. In cramped handwriting, they describe the first moments of arrival, the eerie stillness, the precise geometry of the streets, the uncanny state of the structures. One entry speaks of tools left leaning against half-carved stones, as though the workers had stepped away only hours before. Another describes fresh-looking mortar that crumbled in the hand, still pale and unstained, untouched by centuries of wind and rain. The explorers could not reconcile what they saw with what they had been taught. Ancient ruins are supposed to look ancient, eroded, scattered, overgrown. But here the edges were too sharp, the lines too clean. It felt less like discovering a ruin and more like walking onto a construction site frozen in time. They spent several days surveying the place, taking measurements, sketching the street plans. The records show meticulous work, block dimensions, angles of walls, positions of stairways, but hidden between those neat diagrams are occasional unsettling notes, fragments that never made it into their public accounts. One man wrote of a peculiar unease, a sense that they were being watched from the shadows of the half-built towers. Another swore that in the stillness of dawn, he heard a single rhythmic thud echoing across the plain, like the blow of a distant hammer. When they went to investigate, there was nothing. These experiences they kept quiet. In the late 1800s, archaeology was as much about reputation as it was about discovery. and talk of strange sounds or inexplicable freshness in ancient stone would have invited ridicule. Their official papers stripped away the mystery, reducing the site to a neat category: incomplete settlement, probable abandonment, due to resource shortages. Still, the photographs tell their own tale. Faded sepia images show massive blocks in perfect alignment, streets free of debris, doorways that look ready for hinges that were never installed. In the background, dunes curl like ocean waves around the edges of the city, as if trying to bury its unfinished heart. When they finally left, they took with them a few small artifacts, shards of pottery, fragments of carved stone, and curiously, a bronze chisel still sharp enough to score wood. These were sent back to their patrons, labeled and catalogued without the faintest suggestion of their context's strangeness. Back in Europe, the find attracted little more than passing interest. The big stories of the day were grander: temples in Mesopotamia, tombs in Egypt, newly translated inscriptions from ancient empires. This half-built city in the middle of nowhere did not compete for headlines. The expedition members moved on to other projects, their careers and reputations intact. But in their personal letters, scattered across archives, there are hints that the site stayed with them, unresolved, unsettling. One letter, written more than a decade later by the expedition leader to a colleague, contains a line that stands out among the otherwise mundane correspondence about funding and travel arrangements. "I still think of that place. It was not finished, and yet it was not abandoned in any way I can name. Something ended it, and we will never know what." The location remained obscure for decades, known only to a handful of scholars. Maps from the time mark it faintly, without a name, as if to avoid drawing attention. Local nomads continued to pass it by without stopping. They had their own reasons, whispered in tents at night. This was a place that belonged to others, though no one could say who those others were. The explorers had heard such warnings but dismissed them, assuming they were merely superstition. Years later, when archaeology became more systematic and international, the site was visited again. By then the sand had begun its slow, patient reclamation. Some of the sharper edges the first explorers had marveled at were already softening under decades of wind. Yet even then, the city's unfinished state was unmistakable. New teams took more photographs, more measurements, more samples. They confirmed what had been reported officially before, that construction had stopped abruptly, and that there was no evidence of the city ever having been occupied. But among the new wave of researchers too, the contrast between public and private impressions remained. Academic articles continued to file the site under abandoned construction, but personal field notes contained sketches of tools still embedded in stone, outlines of doorways whose lintels had been carved, but never set into place, half-shaped pillars lying exactly where they must have fallen when the workers stepped away. The mystery deepened when one team analyzed the bronze chisel sent to Europe decades earlier. Metallurgical tests revealed it to be of unusually high quality for its presumed age, its alloying elements carefully balanced to increase hardness. Such precision suggested a sophisticated understanding of metallurgy, one that did not match the period to which the site had been assigned. The official reports made no comment on this mismatch, preferring to leave it unexplored rather than challenge established timelines. In the world of archaeology, such decisions are not unusual. The narrative that survives is the one that fits neatly into existing frameworks. Sites that do not fit, those with anomalies that cannot be explained without rewriting large sections of history, are often left to gather dust in archives. The city remained one of these, its secrets held in a silence as deep as the desert night. Yet the story did not end there. Word of the place, passed quietly between scholars and enthusiasts, eventually reached a new generation of explorers, ones less concerned with reputation and more willing to confront the inexplicable. They returned with modern equipment, determined to examine the city not as a failed settlement, but as a puzzle. Their discoveries would challenge even the cautious language of those 19th-century journals, revealing details that made the city's sudden stillness all the more unnerving. For now we remain with that first moment of discovery, the way the explorers crested the dune, expecting more empty horizon, and instead found a city that had been waiting for them for centuries. A city that should have been bustling with life, yet stood silent, caught forever between the first stone laid and the last one that never came. The more researchers pieced together the city's foundations, the clearer its intended form became. This was no haphazard cluster of dwellings thrown together for survival. It was a blueprint made stone, a vision drawn at a scale so vast that even in its incomplete state, it dwarfs the known cities of its supposed era. The layout radiates order. At its heart, a broad elevated platform dominates the central district, large enough to have supported a temple, palace, or perhaps both. From this hub, wide avenues extend like spokes from the center of a wheel, each aligned with almost uncanny precision to the cardinal directions. Smaller side streets branch off in geometric patterns, as though the planners had mapped the entire city on parchment before a single stone was cut. The scale of the buildings suggests more than simple functionality. These were not modest houses or utilitarian warehouses. Their foundations hint at multi-story structures, some with footprints so large they rival the grand palaces of later civilizations. A monumental gate, partially completed, rises at the edge of the main avenue, its arches soaring above the height of two men, carved with deep grooves meant to hold massive wooden doors. Those doors were never hung. Orthodox historians see here a familiar pattern, a people dreaming beyond their means, driven by ambition but limited by resources. According to this view, the city was an overreach, planned to be the capital of a growing state, perhaps even an empire in the making, but doomed when its leaders miscalculated the labor and wealth required. Yet the very design challenges that interpretation. The planning is so precise, the symmetry so deliberate, that it speaks of a culture with deep experience in large-scale construction. The builders were not experimenting. They were replicating something they had done before. This was not the tentative first step of a society learning to build. This was the confident stride of a civilization that knew exactly what it wanted and how to get there. The central avenues, if completed, would have channeled processions toward the ceremonial platform, creating a dramatic visual corridor. Along these main routes, foundations for colonnades and plazas suggest public gatherings, markets, and civic rituals. Aqueducts partially dug and lined in places were clearly intended to bring fresh water from distant springs, ensuring the city's independence from seasonal rivers. This was a design meant to last for generations. One particularly striking feature is the alignment of the avenues and structures to astronomical points. The main gate faces the exact point where the sun rises on the equinox, a detail requiring careful observation and long-term tracking of celestial patterns. In mainstream interpretations, such alignments are often explained as symbolic, serving religious or seasonal purposes. But some researchers argue that the accuracy here is too exact for symbolism alone, that it could have served as a precise calendar, perhaps even for navigation or agricultural timing. Even the unfinished parts tell a story. In several locations, massive foundation stones had been laid, but not yet topped with walls. In others, walls rose to waist height before halting abruptly. In some cases, the first course of stone blocks lies perfectly squared and level, with nothing above it, like sentences begun but never finished. The materials used further complicate the orthodox view. Stone for the main structures was quarried miles away, requiring enormous effort to transport. Some blocks bear marks from sledges and rollers, but others seem to have been moved in ways that remain speculative. The sheer scale of the operation suggests a centralized authority capable of mobilizing thousands of workers, supplying them with food, tools, and shelter for months or years at a time. Such organization is rare in early state formation. It speaks to a level of political and logistical sophistication not typically assigned to this time period. The hidden truth, as some propose, is that the city was not merely intended as a political capital or a commercial hub. It may have been designed as a ceremonial or symbolic center, something built to embody an idea, perhaps even to commemorate a moment in time. If that is the case, its abrupt halt takes on new weight, for if a symbolic project of such magnitude was left incomplete, it suggests a disruption not only of construction, but of the idea itself. As excavation progressed, archaeologists noted an unusual feature: the lack of domestic quarters near the city center. In most ancient cities, residential areas cluster close to administrative or religious hubs. Here, those spaces are absent, or perhaps never started. The inner city seems almost entirely dedicated to monumental and civic structures, with areas for living possibly planned farther out in a ring that was never built. It raises the unsettling possibility that the city may never have housed its intended population, that it was being built for people who never arrived. In comparing the site to other ancient urban centers, the contrast is striking. Cities like Thebes or Mohenjo-Daro evolved organically, with layers of expansion and adaptation visible in their archaeological record. This city, however, shows no such evolution. It is pure design, an ideal frozen in its earliest stage. There is no sign of improvisation, no evidence that builders adapted the plan as they worked. Everything suggests they were following a master blueprint to the letter. The level of foresight implied by such a plan suggests either extraordinary confidence or a cultural tradition that had done this many times before. And that raises uncomfortable questions. If they had done this before, where are the other cities? If this was their first, why does it display a mastery that others of their time lacked? To the mainstream narrative, these questions are distractions, curiosities to be noted but not pursued. The official explanation remains: the city was a grand vision that failed under the weight of its own ambition. But the alignment of structures, the absence of occupation, the scale of the foundations, and the clear mastery of urban design all hint at something more deliberate, more enigmatic. Some scholars, willing to entertain alternative interpretations, suggest that the city was never meant to function in the way we assume. Perhaps it was part of a network of sites across the region, each built to serve a purpose other than habitation, an unknown system of which this is only one surviving piece. If true, the others may have been destroyed, buried, or still waiting to be found. Standing in the center of its unfinished heart, surrounded by walls that rise just high enough to hint at what they might have been, the scale of the vision becomes almost overwhelming. This was a city intended to impress not only those who lived in it, but those who visited from afar. It was a statement in stone, one that was never fully spoken. The vision remains visible in the bones of the city, but as we turn toward its earliest origins, the question sharpens: how could such a sophisticated plan emerge in a region where surrounding settlements were still little more than villages? Archaeologists often speak of layers of time, the strata of soil and stone that reveal a city's story from its earliest beginnings. In most ancient sites, digging deeper means finding cruder tools, rougher walls, and simpler designs. The deeper you go, the earlier and less advanced the technology becomes. But here, the foundations tell a different story. The first stones laid for this city are not primitive at all. They are massive, flawlessly shaped blocks, their surfaces smoothed to a degree that even later civilizations would struggle to achieve. When dating tests were applied to the soil trapped between them, the results startled even the most seasoned researchers. The earliest phases of construction seem to belong to a period when the surrounding region was still dotted with small, scattered settlements, mud brick huts, and wooden enclosures, barely more advanced than the most basic tribal camps. To the official timeline, this is an anomaly, a temporary one. Such contradictions are often explained away as errors in dating, the result of contaminated samples or disturbed layers. The orthodox account is tidy. The city was built during a later, more advanced phase, and the odd results are simply noise in the data. But the evidence resists dismissal. Independent studies, conducted years apart with different methods, have confirmed the same result. The earliest construction here predates not just the rise of neighboring cities, but also the very cultural and technological framework historians believe was necessary to create something of this magnitude. This means one of two things. Either the official timeline of the region's development is wrong by centuries, or the builders of this city were not typical inhabitants of their time. The first possibility is unsettling enough for historians. The second is far more disruptive. Among those willing to entertain the second possibility, theories range widely. Some propose that an advanced group, perhaps traders, refugees, or conquerors, arrived from elsewhere, bringing their knowledge with them. Others go further, suggesting the builders may have been the remnants of an even older, more sophisticated civilization that had collapsed, leaving behind a fragment of its expertise. The stones themselves offer clues, but they are ambiguous. The quarry marks on the earliest blocks show an efficiency and precision that later phases of the city, even in their unfinished state, do not always match. This has led some to wonder whether the project began under one group of builders and was later continued or at least attempted by another less experienced one. If that is true, it raises another question: what happened to the first builders? Mainstream archaeologists, focused on material evidence, avoid speculation. They suggest more mundane explanations: political upheaval, changing leadership, shifting priorities. Yet the abruptness of the transition and craftsmanship hints at something more abrupt, a disruption that removed the original planners entirely. It is in this earliest phase that the contrast between known history and hidden truth is sharpest. According to the textbooks, the surrounding cultures at the time were isolated, with little contact beyond their immediate neighbors. Yet in the lowest layers of the site, certain architectural details mirror styles seen in distant lands, thousands of kilometers away. These similarities are dismissed as coincidence by conventional scholars, but to others they are fingerprints of a forgotten network of knowledge exchange, one erased from the official record. The dating results also challenge our assumptions about the spread of technology. Metallurgy, for example, was supposedly in its infancy in this region during the period suggested by the earliest layers. Yet tiny metal fragments embedded in the mortar, possibly accidental inclusions from construction tools, contain alloy compositions more advanced than anything attributed to the era. No single piece is enough to rewrite history, but together they form a pattern that is difficult to ignore. For those who prefer a cleaner narrative, the answer is to compress the timeline. The city must have been built later, and any signs of earlier construction are either mistaken or the result of natural processes. But in doing so, they strip away one of the site's most intriguing qualities: the possibility that its origins lie in a time when such a feat should have been impossible. Local oral traditions, sparse though they are, seem to align with the idea of an older origin. Stories tell of first builders who arrived from the horizon, stayed only a short while, and left before their work was complete. These tales are woven with metaphor and myth, speaking of stones that drank the sun and walls that knew the stars. The poetic language makes them easy to dismiss, but certain details like the equinox alignment of the main gate suggest that at least some of the imagery is rooted in fact. If the earliest foundations truly belong to such an ancient phase, then the city's very existence becomes a puzzle of lost context. What was happening in this region at that time that could justify such a massive undertaking? And why would the project be abandoned so completely that no other settlement of similar scale appeared for centuries afterward? Some researchers suggest a radical possibility that the city was intended as a forward base or ceremonial site for a civilization whose center lay far away, perhaps across seas or deserts now forgotten. The absence of domestic structures in the early phase supports this idea. It may have been designed for temporary use by a specialized population, not for permanent habitation. Whatever the case, the earliest stones speak a language of precision and ambition unmatched in their supposed era. They stand at the root of the city's story, silent witnesses to a beginning that official history cannot easily place. And if the first chapter is this unclear, how can we trust the chapters that follow? The hidden truth may be that the city was never the product of a single culture or a single moment. It may have been a palimpsest of intentions begun by one group with one vision, inherited by another with different aims, and ultimately left to the desert before either could see it completed. In the shadows of these ancient foundations, the timeline we thought we knew begins to crumble. And with it, so does the certainty that civilizations rise and fall in neat linear order. The city's mystery does not lie only in its size or its age. It lives in the marks left by the hands or perhaps the minds of its builders. In the quarries where the earliest stones were cut, the walls bear long, straight incisions, as if a blade of impossible length and sharpness had sliced through solid rock. Blocks weighing dozens, even hundreds of tons were shaped with edges so precise they fit together without mortar, the seams nearly invisible. In some cases, even a sheet of paper could not slip between them. Mainstream archaeologists attribute this to patient craftsmanship, countless hours of chisel and hammer, the slow wearing away of imperfections. It is a comforting explanation, fitting neatly into the narrative of human perseverance. But those who have examined the surfaces closely speak of something stranger: parallel striations, microscopic grooves that run too evenly to have been made by hand tools alone. In one unfinished block, a cut runs perfectly straight for several meters, then stops abruptly. Under magnification, the texture of this cut suggests a uniform pressure, the kind more consistent with a machine-guided process than manual labor. Yet no such machines are acknowledged to have existed in the period assigned to this site. The tools found here only deepen the riddle. A small collection of chisels, hammers, and stone polishers has been recovered, but they seem inadequate for the scale of the work. The chisels are bronze, the hammers of hard stone, tools that would blunt quickly under the strain of shaping such dense rock. To produce the vast quantity of perfectly cut blocks in the city, thousands of these tools would have been required, and yet only a handful have been found. Some researchers suggest that the tools on display may be symbolic, placed there long after construction stopped as offerings or as part of a ritual. If true, the actual implements used to build the city remain undiscovered, or perhaps were deliberately removed. One of the most puzzling artifacts is a shard of an unknown alloy found embedded in a stone joint. Analysis revealed it to be harder than steel, yet with a crystalline structure unlike any metal used in the region's history. Mainstream publications avoid speculation, labeling it as contamination from later periods. But its location, sealed within the original jointing, suggests it has been there since the day the stone was set. The hidden truth, according to more adventurous minds, is that the builders possessed techniques for working stone that have since been lost. These may have been mechanical, chemical, or even something entirely different, methods that allowed them to cut, move, and place massive blocks with speed and precision. Moving the stones themselves presents another puzzle. Many were quarried kilometers away, over rough terrain and without direct river access. Traditional explanations involve sledges, rollers, and manpower, hundreds of laborers dragging each block with ropes. But certain transport routes would have required crossing steep inclines, where the weight of such stones should have made movement nearly impossible without advanced engineering solutions. Experimental archaeology has attempted to replicate such feats with teams of volunteers and replica tools. The results are mixed. While small blocks can be moved in this way, the largest examples at the site remain beyond the capacity of the experiments. The implication is unsettling. Either the builders had methods we no longer understand, or the city was constructed under conditions, physical or societal, that we cannot easily imagine today. Within the city, the precision continues. Doorways are cut so evenly that they appear machined. Pillars have perfectly cylindrical shafts, their diameters consistent from base to top. Some blocks bear holes drilled straight through their centers, the sides polished smooth. Even with modern equipment, drilling such holes in dense stone without cracking it is a challenge. The orthodox position maintains that patience and skilled labor are enough to explain all of this. But it is the combination of scale, speed, and uniformity that strains this interpretation. To achieve this degree of perfection across so many structures would have required either a staggering number of artisans working simultaneously or a level of organization and technology that the accepted history does not allow for this era. In the half-finished sections, the story shifts again. Here, stones lie partially shaped, their surfaces rough and unpolished. In some cases, chisel marks are visible, but in others the shaping seems to have been halted mid-process, as though the work stopped in the middle of a single day. The suddenness mirrors the city's overall abandonment, a moment frozen, preserved in unfinished form. It is in these half-finished pieces that the contrast between known history and hidden truth becomes most visceral. According to the official account, work simply slowed as resources dwindled, eventually stopping altogether. But the evidence suggests a sharper break, a day when every worker put down their tools and walked away. One particularly haunting detail lies in the tool marks themselves. In some stones, two different styles of cutting are visible, one set deep and precise, the other shallow and irregular. It is as if the work had been started by one group and finished, or attempted by another with less skill or less capable tools. This could support the theory that the city's construction passed from its original builders to successors who could not replicate the same quality, leading to a gradual breakdown in the project's execution. If the builders did indeed possess advanced methods, the loss of that knowledge could explain the abandonment. Without the tools, or the skill to continue at the original standard, finishing the city might have been impossible. Still, this remains speculation that mainstream academia resists. The official version keeps the mystery firmly within the bounds of human error over ambition, mismanagement, and bad luck. Yet the stones themselves seem reluctant to comply with such a mundane explanation. Each block, each cut, each hole drilled into the rock is a silent argument for another story, one in which the builders had means beyond what we can account for. One in which the tools they used and the knowledge they carried have vanished so completely that we can only glimpse them in the faint traces they left behind. Whatever those tools were, they left behind a city both incomplete and impossible, an unfinished monument to abilities we no longer possess and perhaps no longer understand. Far from the half-built streets of the city, deep in the wind-carved hills, the quarries lie silent. They are vast scars in the earth, their floors littered with blocks that were never moved, some half-shaped, others fully formed, yet still rooted to the bedrock. Here, the true scale of the builder's ambition is revealed, not in the city's walls but in the stones that never made it there. The most striking of these is a monolith so immense it dwarfs the men who stand beside it for scale in early photographs. Its length stretches over 20 meters, its weight estimated at several hundred tons. Even today, with modern cranes and trucks, moving such a block would be an engineering challenge of the highest order. Yet here it lies, cut with perfect precision, its edges sharp, its surfaces smooth, waiting for the journey it never took. Mainstream archaeology explains such finds simply: the stones were too heavy to transport, the work too demanding, perhaps a crack formed during cutting, rendering the block useless, or perhaps the demand for the city's completion no longer justified the effort. But these explanations stumble when applied to the sheer number of unfinished monoliths scattered through the quarry. There are dozens, ranging from modest blocks to massive giants, all in various stages of preparation. Some rest on carved pedestals, already freed on three sides, needing only the final cut to be lifted away. Others are still partially embedded in the rock, their shapes emerging like fossils from stone. The sense of interruption is almost theatrical. You can stand in the quarry and trace the lines of a chisel or a saw to the exact point where it stopped, mid-stroke. The cut is clean, the groove fresh, as though the craftsman planned to return after a short rest. That return never came. The absence of debris is also telling. In an active quarry, Stone chips and dust gather in heaps. Here, the work areas are eerily tidy, as if swept clean or left before the waste could accumulate. Some researchers suggest that the wind and shifting sands may have carried away the lighter debris, but the larger fragments, those too heavy to be moved by nature alone, are also missing. It is as if the quarry itself was cleared before being abandoned. For those who see the city as part of a hidden history, the quarries are perhaps the most compelling evidence of sudden abandonment. If the builders had merely lost interest or funding, they might have scaled down their operations, transporting smaller blocks, finishing what could be completed. But instead, everything stopped, even work that was only hours from completion. Transporting such massive stones, even in modern times, requires careful planning and immense resources. The routes from quarry to city would have had to be prepared in advance, leveled paths, reinforced bridges, or perhaps a system of rollers and sledges. Yet no such infrastructure has been found between the quarry and the site. Either it has eroded entirely, or it never existed in the first place. This raises an unsettling question. Were these colossal blocks ever truly meant to be moved? Some alternative researchers suggest that the monoliths were symbolic in themselves, that their cutting was part of a ritual or demonstration of power. A statement that the builders could command the earth to yield such giants. In this view, their transport was secondary, perhaps even unnecessary. Others take the speculation further, proposing that the builder possessed means of moving heavy loads that have been lost to history, methods that did not require the laborious groundwork we would expect. This idea gains a strange sort of traction when one examines certain tool marks in the quarry. Alongside the traditional chisel grooves are long, shallow cuts that run with mechanical regularity, as if made by a guided blade or some other cutting apparatus. The stone's surface in these areas has a texture unlike anything seen from hand tools alone, smooth, almost glassy in places, as though heat or vibration played a role in the shaping. Such marks are difficult to explain within the constraints of known ancient technology. In one corner of the quarry, a half-freed block bears an even stranger feature. A series of perfectly round holes, evenly spaced, drilled directly into the stone's face. The holes are deep and clean, their edges sharp, their diameters uniform. No tool from the city's accepted time period could have produced them with such precision. These, too, remain unexplained in official accounts. The sheer volume of unused stone here also complicates the conventional explanation of simple overreach. If the city had been abandoned due to resource depletion, why continue quarrying at all? Some of these monoliths appear to have been cut after the city's major works had already halted, as if the quarry was still active, even when the streets below were empty. The surrounding landscape bears silent witness to the passage of time, but the quarry itself feels immune. The edges of the cuts remain sharp, the tool marks crisp, as though centuries of weather have only lightly touched them. This uncanny preservation deepens the sense that the abandonment happened not gradually, but in an instant. Standing among the monoliths, you cannot help but feel their weight, not only their physical mass, but the weight of questions they carry. If the builders could shape and move such stones, why did they leave them behind? If they could not, why start cutting them at all? Was this a project cut short by human limitation, or by something far beyond it? For the orthodox historian, the answer remains pragmatic: a shift in priorities, a breakdown in leadership, or a sudden environmental challenge that made the completion of the city, and the transport of its massive stones, impossible. But the stones themselves seem to argue otherwise. They lie ready, as if still waiting for the signal to move, their interrupted creation a silent echo of a larger mystery. Some who visit the quarry describe it as more haunting than the city itself. The city, after all, is a place that was never alive. It is an empty shell. The quarry, by contrast, is where the life of the project was still pulsing when it stopped. Here, you can almost see the workers in your mind's eye, cutting, lifting, shaping, preparing. The frozen moment in this place feels closer, as if whatever stopped the work here happened just minutes ago in geological time. The mainstream narrative draws a line here, closing the chapter with the same refrain: overambition, miscalculation, and abandonment. Yet when you stand among these giants, you feel the inadequacy of that explanation. These stones were not mistakes. They were deliberate, precise, and purposeful, and then, without warning, left to sleep in the sun. The quarry is a wound in the earth that never healed, and in its depths, the silence feels less like the absence of sound and more like the holding of a breath that has lasted for centuries, waiting for an ending that never came. Within the city's boundaries, the sense of interruption is everywhere, not the ruins of a place long inhabited and worn down by centuries of weather and war, but something stranger, a city frozen in the moment of its making. Streets stretch out in precise geometric grids, then stop in abrupt dead ends where construction never resumed. Some are paved with massive stone slabs, their surfaces smoothed to perfection, while others remain bare earth, marked only by the faint outlines of where paving stones were meant to be set. Aqueduct channels run straight and true for hundreds of meters before ending suddenly in open ground, the carved stone troughs still waiting for their next section. In places, you can see the guiding lines scratched into the rock by the builders, faint but deliberate mapping where the water would have flowed. These lines now lead nowhere, their intended destinations lost in the emptiness beyond the city's edge. Inside the walls, partially built structures reveal the frozen choreography of labor. A block of stone lies beside an unfinished doorway, perfectly shaped to fit into place but never lifted into position. Wooden scaffolding, now long rotted away, once clung to the skeletons of buildings that still stand at half their intended height. In certain areas, the foundations have been laid out with painstaking precision, straight, level, and square, yet nothing ever rose above them. The plans are there, etched in stone, but the execution stopped before it began. It is like seeing the blueprint of a masterpiece, only to find the brush never touched the canvas. Mainstream archaeology interprets this as a natural product of overreach. The city's planners aimed for grandeur but underestimated the resources and manpower required. Yet the uniformity of the stoppage tells another story. It was not as if one district fell behind while others flourished. Everywhere, the same sudden silence appears, across residential quarters, public spaces, and monumental buildings alike. The interiors tell their own tale. In several half-finished rooms, the walls are partially plastered, the surfaces smoothed in some areas, while others remain raw stone. In one chamber, decorative carvings adorn half a wall, their patterns intricate and deliberate, while the opposite wall remains blank. The transition from finished to unfinished is not gradual, it is sharp, as if the artisans were pulled away mid-task. Tools lie scattered in some places, chisels, mallets, and baskets for carrying rubble, seemingly left where they were last used. In most ancient sites, such tools are rare. They are reused, repurposed, or taken away. Here, a surprising number appear to have been abandoned in place, as if their owners expected to return the next day. The aqueduct system is perhaps the clearest emblem of the city's incompleteness. Channels cut into the ground and into stone blocks trace the path of water that never flowed. Basins stand dry, never connected to the network that would have filled them. The design suggests a sophisticated understanding of hydraulics, with gradients calculated to carry water efficiently from source to city. Yet the absence of completion means that, for all its ambition, the system never brought a single drop. One of the most puzzling details is the presence of spaces clearly intended for human activity: market squares, courtyards, meeting halls that were never finished, yet bear signs of preliminary use. In one square, traces of temporary wooden stalls have been found, suggesting that some attempt at habitation or commerce may have occurred even before the city was completed. This raises an uncomfortable question: was the city in partial use while still under construction? And if so, what caused its sudden evacuation? For some researchers outside the mainstream, these clues point to a story not of slow decline but of immediate cessation. The city was not abandoned after years of struggle, it was left in the middle of a day's work. Something happened that made continuing impossible, or irrelevant. The evidence of suddenness is reinforced by unfinished infrastructure projects that cross multiple zones. Roads begin with well-laid paving stones, then devolve into rough gravel, then into nothing at all. Foundations for bridges stand without their spans, their ends dangling over empty space. Even monumental gateways, half carved from their blocks, stand in mute witness to the day the work stopped. In one striking case, a massive lintel stone lies beside its intended place, carved and polished, ready to be hoisted into position above a grand entrance. The supports for the lintel are already in place, their upper surfaces smoothed to receive it. The stone itself rests exactly where the builders left it, less than 10 meters away from its destination. This is not the kind of scene left by gradual neglect. This is a job interrupted mid-step. Mainstream historians lean on practical explanations: political upheaval, economic collapse, or natural disaster. Yet the city offers no evidence of destruction. There are no scorch marks from fire, no signs of battle, no earthquake damage in the unfinished structures. The silence here is not one of chaos, but of absence. Walking these half-finished streets, the contrast between the known history and the hidden truth becomes visceral. Officially, this was simply a failed project, abandoned when costs outweighed benefits. But the layout, the tools left behind, and the uniform stoppage tell another story, one of an event so sudden that it froze the city in time. For those who study such mysteries, the city is not a ruin in the traditional sense. It is a snapshot of a moment lost to history, a preserved instant, when human hands were building something extraordinary, only to stop without warning. It is this quality, this sense of a life interrupted, that makes the city feel less like an archaeological site and more like the aftermath of an unspoken disaster. Some who walk here say they feel watched, not by spirits or ghosts, but by the work itself, by the half-laid stones and the unfinished arches, as if they are waiting for someone to finally complete them. The air feels heavy with anticipation, the kind that has lasted centuries. The known history tells us this is nothing more than an ambitious failure. But the hidden truth may be that we are seeing the result of a moment when history itself took a sudden turn, leaving the city behind as collateral. In these empty streets, every unfinished wall whispers the same question, not why it failed, but why it stopped, so suddenly, everywhere, all at once. Beneath the unfinished streets lies another city, one hidden from casual view, carved not from ambition to reach the sky, but from the need to vanish into the earth. Access to this subterranean world begins with narrow staircases cut directly into bedrock. In some places, these stairs start in the middle of an open courtyard, their mouths unmarked by any structure above, as if the builders wanted no one to notice them from a distance. The steps descend in tight, uneven spirals, their walls smooth in some areas, roughly hewn in others, as though speed was more important than refinement. At the bottom, the tunnels spread in multiple directions, some wide enough to walk through upright, others so low that a person must crawl. They wind and double back, forming a labyrinth that seems designed to confuse anyone unfamiliar with it. In places, small alcoves have been carved into the walls, their purpose unclear: storage niches, sleeping spaces, or perhaps altars. The unfinished nature of these tunnels mirrors the city above. Passages abruptly end in solid rock, tool marks still visible where work stopped. Some walls are only partially reinforced with stone blocks, while others remain raw, the rock bearing fresh chisel marks as if the workers had just stepped away. Mainstream interpretations hold that these underground works were part of storage facilities, cistern systems, or shelters from harsh weather. Certainly, some chambers appear designed to hold large jars or amphorae, and there are clear signs of water channels carved into the floor. But these explanations do not account for the sheer scale of the underground network, or for the chambers whose purpose does not match any known utilitarian function. One such chamber lies at the intersection of three tunnels, perfectly circular, with a domed ceiling rising above head height. Its walls are carved with shallow grooves that spiral upward. The grooves are too precise to be the result of random tool marks, yet too shallow to serve any obvious structural purpose. They seem decorative or symbolic. In another part of the network, the tunnels open into a hall that stretches nearly 30 meters in length. The hall's ceiling is supported by massive pillars, each only half carved from the surrounding stone, as if frozen in the act of being freed. The scale of the space suggests it was meant for gatherings, yet no seating or other fixtures have been found. The sense of urgency in these tunnels is palpable. Above ground, the city's half-built walls suggest a project that slowed and stopped. Below, the work feels different, rushed, intense, and left mid-stride. If the surface city was meant to impress, the underground world feels like it was meant to protect or hide. Those who believe in a hidden truth see the tunnels as evidence of a plan that shifted drastically before completion. In their view, the builders began with an open monumental city, but something happened that forced them underground. Perhaps they sought to create a refuge, a last redoubt against an approaching threat, whether natural, human, or something else entirely. Supporters of this theory point to certain architectural choices. The deeper you go, the narrower the tunnels become, forcing any would-be intruder to slow their advance. Some corridors have deliberate choke points, tight spaces followed by open chambers, where defenders could have waited in ambush. Even the winding layout seems tactical, not accidental. In the most remote section yet explored, archaeologists found a chamber containing several large stone blocks, each carved into a crude rectangular shape, but never moved. The blocks are positioned in such a way that they could have been used to seal the chamber's entrance, turning it into a sanctuary or a prison. Another chamber nearby contains faint traces of pigment on its walls, reds, blacks, and ochres, forming shapes too eroded to identify clearly. Some claim to see figures, elongated, distorted, and not entirely human. Others dismiss this as the mind's tendency to see patterns in randomness. There is one particularly unsettling discovery. In a side tunnel far from the main staircases, a row of small alcoves has been carved into the wall, each large enough to hold a single seated person. The floor of each alcove is slightly recessed, as though to accommodate the lower half of a body. No human remains were found, but the design is unmistakably anthropomorphic. Whether these were intended as burial niches or as seats for living occupants remains an open question. The lack of light below ground must have been absolute. Without torches or oil lamps, these tunnels would be in perfect darkness, an environment that feels unnatural to human senses. Yet some chambers have soot stains on the ceiling, suggesting that fires once burned here. Others have no such marks, implying they were left unused, or perhaps deliberately kept dark. From a purely practical standpoint, constructing such an extensive subterranean network, while also building the city above, would have required an enormous workforce. This raises a difficult question for the mainstream account. Why divert so much labor into underground spaces, if the priority was the monumental city on the surface? Unless, of course, the underground was the priority all along. Some researchers propose that the underground works were started later, as a reaction to an unforeseen crisis. They imagine a scenario in which the city's leaders received word of an approaching danger and ordered all efforts to shift below ground. This would explain the incomplete nature of both the surface and subterranean construction. Neither had the time to be finished before the project was abandoned entirely. Others go further, suggesting that the underground city was not meant for defense, but for concealment. If something, whether a force of nature, an invading power, or an unknown phenomenon, was capable of wiping out a settlement, then hiding its people and treasures below the earth might have been the only viable strategy. Yet even this theory faces a troubling fact. There is no sign that anyone ever lived here. No cooking fires, no midden pits, no discarded tools in the deeper levels. The underground spaces are empty of the small, everyday traces that human habitation leaves behind. If these tunnels were intended as a refuge, it seems they were never used, which leads to an even stranger possibility, that the underground city was built in preparation for something that never arrived, that the builders dug, carved, and shaped these spaces in expectation of a threat, only for events to take an entirely different turn. This would make the abandonment even more sudden, more inexplicable, for both the surface and subterranean works. Walking through these tunnels today, the silence is absolute. Every footstep echoes down the stone corridor, bouncing off walls that have heard no human voice for centuries. The air is cool, still, and carries the faint scent of mineral and dust. In the absence of wind, time feels slower here, as though the underground city has been holding its breath, just like the one above. And in that breathless darkness, the contrast between what we are told and what we see becomes sharper than ever. The known history says these tunnels were functional spaces abandoned when the city failed. But the hidden truth may be that they were the heart of the project, a heart that stopped beating before it ever pumped life into the city above. Scattered across the site, both above ground and deep within the unfinished tunnels, are objects that seem to defy the city's assigned place in history. On the surface, near the half-built market square, archaeologists have unearthed ceramic vessels of a style never before found in this region. Their shapes are elegant yet oddly impractical, tall, narrow-necked jars with thin walls that would shatter with rough handling. The clay contains mineral inclusions not sourced from the surrounding landscape, suggesting they were imported or brought from somewhere far older than the city itself. Even more curious are the markings etched into their surfaces. At first glance, they appear to be simple geometric designs, spirals, intersecting lines, and repeating triangles. Yet, when compared to other artifacts from neighboring regions, these patterns do not match any known symbolic system. To some researchers, they are decorative. To others, they are fragments of a lost script. Beneath the city, the artifacts become stranger still. In one of the larger chambers, a collection of carved stone tablets was found stacked neatly against a wall, as if awaiting transport. The carvings are deep and precise, the lines clean even after centuries, but they depict symbols that again do not correspond to any known written language. Some resemble stylized human forms with elongated limbs, others show shapes that could be animals, stars, or something else entirely. Mainstream archaeologists often avoid attributing meaning to such ambiguous symbols. They file them under undeciphered and move on. But for those seeking the hidden truth, these carvings are tantalizing clues. They suggest that the builders were either in contact with an unknown culture or were descendants of it. Among the most debated finds is a small object recovered from a side tunnel, a disc of metal no larger than a hand, with concentric grooves cut into its surface. The grooves are too regular to be random, yet too shallow to serve as decoration alone. Under magnification, tiny notches appear along the edges of some grooves, as though they were meant to interact with something else. Metallurgical analysis revealed that the disc is made of an alloy containing traces of elements not native to the region and difficult to smelt with the known technology of the era. The official reports describe it as an ornamental object of unknown function. Unofficially, some suggest it may have been part of a mechanism, something far more advanced than the rest of the city's tools and materials would imply. In the unfinished aqueduct channels above, workers once embedded small stones of unusual color into the mortar. Most are pale green, almost translucent, and seem to catch the light in strange ways. When tested, they proved to be a type of mineral typically found deep underground, far from any known trade route. The purpose of embedding them here remains unclear. Some believe they were decorative, others that they served as markers or indicators within the water system. Another discovery, made in the shadow of a half-built gateway, further complicates the narrative. A fragment of textile preserved under a fallen slab, woven from plant fibers not native to the surrounding valley, the fabric bears a repeating pattern of interlocking shapes that resemble the geometric designs on the ceramic vessels. The dyes used to color it have retained surprising vibrancy, suggesting a level of textile production beyond what was common for the city's supposed time frame. If the city was truly abandoned before completion, how did these objects apparently imported from distant lands or belonging to a much older culture find their way here? The most provocative theory comes from those who argue that the city was not an isolated creation at all, but rather the final project of a people with a deep and ancient lineage. According to this view, the artifacts are not anomalies. They are remnants of a cultural memory that stretched back centuries, perhaps even millennia, before the city began to rise. In this telling, the half-built streets and unfinished tunnels were the last attempt to preserve a knowledge that was already fading. The strange symbols, the unusual materials, the out-of-place objects, they were all part of a legacy meant to endure. But something cut that attempt short. Mainstream history resists such interpretations, preferring to see the artifacts as the result of trade or migration. Yet the sheer concentration of unusual finds here, in a city that never truly lived, is difficult to explain through ordinary commerce alone. The carvings on the stone tablets seem to confirm this tension between what is known and what remains hidden. One particular tablet shows a pattern of radiating lines from a central point, with small circles placed along each line. Some believe it represents the sun, others, a map, still others, a star chart. If it is a star chart, the arrangement of the circles does not match the night sky as it appears today, leading some to wonder if it represents the heavens as they appear in a different epoch entirely. In one of the most remote chambers below ground, excavated found a cluster of small stone spheres, each about the size of a clenched fist. They are perfectly smooth, without visible tool marks, and made from a type of basalt not found anywhere nearby. The purpose of these spheres is unknown. They could be weights, ritual objects, or something entirely different. The fact that they were grouped together, hidden deep underground, suggests intentional placement. The known history calls them curiosities, unconnected to the city's fate. The hidden truth may be that they were part of a knowledge system or technology we no longer understand. Every artifact here challenges the neat boundaries of the official timeline. They imply connections to distant places, to vanished traditions, to knowledge that does not fit within the era the city is assigned to. And in doing so, they widen the gap between the accepted story and the unanswered questions that still echo through its empty streets. If the city had been completed, these artifacts might have been displayed in temples, integrated into its water systems, worn by its leaders, or hidden in its vaults. Instead, they remain scattered, half-buried, waiting for someone to read their story, a story that may rewrite not just the history of this site, but the history of civilization itself. The absence of people is the city's loudest silence. Across the half-built plazas and within the shadowed tunnels, there is no sign of a gradual decline. No layers of debris, no burned walls, no evidence of fighting. Instead, the work simply stops. Tools are left where they last struck stone. Piles of unplaced blocks sit beside unfinished walls. In one corner of the market square, a stack of wooden scaffolding still leans against a half-constructed arch, its timbers weathered but unbroken. In the underground chambers, the pattern is the same. Chisels lie on the ground beside half-carved pillars. Stone blocks meant for reinforcement rest in neat rows, never set into place. Clay vessels, some containing dried mortar, remain untouched, as if awaiting the return of their users. But the users never came back. Mainstream accounts offer practical explanations. The city may have been abandoned because of a resource shortage, political upheaval, or an epidemic. Yet none of these neatly fit with the evidence. There is no sign of mass burial, no skeletal remains, no traces of burning or flood damage. If the builders left because of famine or disease, they left nothing to suggest the chaos such crises usually bring. Some researchers have studied the soil around the site, looking for signs of environmental collapse, pollen shifts that might indicate crop failure or chemical traces of drought. While minor fluctuations have been noted, they are not severe enough to explain the complete and immediate halt of construction. One of the more intriguing clues comes from a series of footprints found in a layer of fine dust inside one of the lower tunnels. The prints are crisp, well-defined, and belong to at least 4 individuals. They all move in the same direction, deeper into the tunnels, and then abruptly stop. There is no evidence of where those individuals went next. The floor beyond that point is undisturbed, as though no one had ever walked there. Another lead lies in the remnants of food storage. In several partially completed storerooms, archaeologists found amphorae filled with grain, sealed with resin. The grain is still there, carbonized by time, but otherwise untouched. Abandoning such stores would have been unthinkable unless departure was urgent or involuntary. In the hidden truth version of events, this sudden absence is not the result of a slow erosion of society, but of a single decisive moment. Something happened, something that made the workforce drop their tools, leave their food, and vanish. Whether they fled willingly, were evacuated, or were taken, is the unanswered question. Some point to the artifacts from earlier sections, objects not native to the region, as possible clues. Perhaps the city's builders were not just constructing a settlement, but safeguarding something of value, something others might have wanted. If an external power learned of this, it could explain an abrupt and forced removal. Others turned to the possibility of an internal decision. The leadership may have ordered the workforce to leave for strategic reasons, relocating to a safer site, retreating in anticipation of an attack, or moving to fulfill a religious or prophetic directive. Yet no evidence of a successor settlement has been found, and no historical records mention the relocation of such a large population. A more unsettling theory suggests that the disappearance was not relocation at all, but erasure. In this view, the builders, along with their knowledge, artifacts, and plans, were removed in a way that left no trace, either by a conquering force determined to eliminate them entirely, or by some phenomenon beyond our current understanding. The absence of graves is a key point. In almost every ancient site, even those abandoned in haste, human remains appear eventually, victims of conflict, disease, or time. Here, nothing, not a single confirmed burial, has been uncovered within the city's limits, or in the surrounding landscape. Even more curious is the lack of looting. An abandoned site, especially one containing valuable stone and metal, would normally attract scavengers. Yet many of the city's materials, carefully quarried blocks, partially carved pillars, remain untouched. It is as if the location was deliberately avoided after the departure, shunned for reasons unknown. For the local communities that came centuries later, the place was not incorporated into their settlements. Instead, it remained empty, a landmark without a story. Oral traditions speak of the place that waits or the work of those who left, but none offer details of who those people were or why they vanished. Archaeologists examining tool marks and construction patterns note that work stopped mid-process across every sector of the city simultaneously. This is not what you would expect from a gradual abandonment, where certain areas are finished while others fall into disuse. It suggests coordination, perhaps even a signal that triggered the halt. That signal, whatever it was, marked the end of the city's brief existence. The last footsteps in the dust, the untouched grain, the silent plazas, all speak to a single moment frozen in time, a moment after which the builders were simply gone. The known history says they walked away, leaving a failed project behind. The hidden truth wonders if they ever truly had the choice. The city's silence invites theories the way an open canvas invites paint. Every unanswered question becomes a space for speculation. And in the case of this unfinished metropolis, there is no shortage of voices offering explanations, some grounded in careful evidence, others in bold leaps of imagination. The most conventional theory is the simplest resource failure. According to this view, the site was chosen in optimism, but the environment could not sustain the scale of the project. Perhaps the surrounding land proved unsuitable for farming, the water table too deep to access, or the seasonal rains too unreliable. The builders may have realized partway through that their city could not feed itself, forcing them to abandon it. But the physical evidence weakens this idea. The partially completed aqueducts show advanced planning for water management, and the surrounding valley shows no signs of severe drought in the period attributed to construction. Moreover, the grain stores left behind suggest that, at the moment of departure, food was still available. Another mainstream explanation points to political instability. Civilizations rise and fall on the strength of their leadership, and if the ruling power collapsed through assassination, rebellion, or defeat in war, the construction could have halted overnight. In this scenario, the workers may have dispersed back to their homelands, leaving no single group to carry on the project. Yet here, too, the clues resist the narrative. No signs of battle scars on the city. There are no burned buildings, no collapsed walls from siege weapons, no layer of destruction debris. And if political upheaval had forced the abandonment, why was no other faction or neighboring power seen moving in to claim such a valuable foundation? Disease is another candidate. Epidemics have ended settlements before they could fully flourish. A sudden illness sweeping through the workforce could have emptied the site quickly, but again, the absence of mass graves is striking. Even in hurried burials, traces remain. Here, nothing. From the edge of accepted scholarship, other voices propose a more deliberate ending. They suggest the builders themselves chose to leave, not out of necessity, but because the city had fulfilled its true purpose before it was even finished. In this view, the structures we see were never meant to be lived in. They were ceremonial, symbolic, or part of a short-term project whose conclusion was planned from the beginning. Supporters of this idea point to the unusual artifacts, the undeciphered symbols, and the precisely cut stones that seem to belong to a broader, older tradition. Perhaps the city was intended as a gathering place, a point of exchange or ritual, rather than a permanent habitation. When its purpose was complete, whether that was a single event, a seasonal meeting, or the passing of some celestial alignment, the builders departed by design. Then there are theories that stretch further still, drawing on patterns seen in other ancient mysteries. Some researchers compare the city to megalithic sites that also appear incomplete or abandoned, such as structures in South America or the Middle East, where enormous stones were cut but never moved into place. They propose that these cases might be linked, the result of a shared event or catastrophe that spanned multiple regions. One fringe theory suggests a cosmic trigger, a meteor strike elsewhere, a sudden climatic shift, or even a solar event that disrupted civilizations simultaneously, forcing them to abandon their projects in unison. While such scenarios are difficult to prove, geological records do contain evidence of abrupt environmental changes at various points in history. A more controversial group of theorists ventures into the realm of contact hypotheses. They point to the city's non-local artifacts, the undeciphered carvings, and the precise geometry of its layout as signs that the builders may have had access to knowledge or influence from a culture far beyond their immediate region. Some take this further, hinting at the possibility of a lost civilization whose reach extended globally or even non-human intervention. Mainstream archaeology rejects these ideas, insisting that all cultures develop their technologies independently through trial and error over generations. But the hidden truth seekers argue that the evidence here fits too neatly into a pattern of sites around the world where technological leaps appear suddenly without clear precursors. Still, there is a middle ground between the extremes of accepted scholarship and speculative leaps. Some independent researchers suggest the city was caught in the cross-current of a large-scale migration. Perhaps it was meant to serve as a hub for a people on the move, a transitional capital for a culture shifting its territory. If those migration plans changed suddenly, the half-built city could have been left behind, frozen in its incomplete state. Another variant of this migration theory holds that the builders were refugees from an earlier catastrophe. They may have carried remnants of their culture with them, artifacts, symbols, construction methods, and begun anew here. But if their old enemies, or the forces they fled, caught up to them, they may have been compelled to leave before their work was done. In all these theories, the sharpness of the city's halt remains the central puzzle. This was not a settlement that dwindled over decades. It was a project cut short in a single stroke, whether by nature, politics, design, or something we have yet to imagine. The known history chooses the explanations that fit neatly into established timelines, environmental limits, political collapse, or disease. These are safe answers, even if they leave gaps. The hidden truth looks into those gaps and sees the outlines of something larger. A story that may connect this unfinished city to other places, other cultures. Whichever version you favor, the reality is that the city's abandonment was absolute. No one returned to finish the walls, to repurpose the stones, or to reclaim the site for another generation. It was left as it stood, entrusted to the elements, waiting for its rediscovery centuries later. And when that rediscovery came, it brought with it the same questions the builders left behind, questions that, despite decades of study, remain unanswered. The city waited in silence for centuries, its half-built walls casting long shadows over a plain that had forgotten its makers. Winds carried dust into empty streets, and the scaffolding rotted away. The unfinished towers became nesting places for birds and burrowing creatures. To the outside world, it ceased to exist. Its reappearance began not with a formal expedition, but with a rumor. In the late 19th century, traders moving between distant markets spoke of strange stones in the desert, blocks too large for any living community to have shaped, arranged in ways that suggested order rather than chance. They claimed the land was cursed, that animals avoided it, and that even the most desperate nomads refused to camp nearby. Such tales were irresistible to a certain type of explorer. By the early 1900s, the first outsiders had reached the site. What they found defied their expectations. This was no random scatter of ruins. Streets were aligned with precision, foundations marked the footprints of grand buildings, and certain walls bore markings no one could read. More curious still was the scale. Everything was massive, far beyond the requirements of a small settlement. One early visitor, an amateur archaeologist named Thomas Brigham, wrote in his journal, "It is as if a great hand began to carve a monument to eternity, then withdrew, leaving the task unfinished. There is no sign of destruction, only absence." Brigham's sketches, published in a London periodical, ignited public interest. But in an age when archaeology was often more treasure hunting than science, the site drew as many fortune seekers as scholars. The first formal excavation began in 1921, led by a small team funded by a private European society. Their work was slow and deliberate, hindered by the remoteness of the site and the harsh climate. They documented the street grid, the foundation stones, and the scattered artifacts, many of which even then puzzled them. Pottery styles matched no known culture in the immediate region. A set of bronze tools far more advanced than the expected timeline emerged from beneath layers of wind-blown sand. It was during these early digs that the most famous find of the period was uncovered. A single slab of polished basalt, carved with a dense field of symbols unlike any script from surrounding civilizations. Linguists struggled to categorize it. Some thought it pictographic, others an entirely lost writing system. No translation was ever agreed upon, but the slab became an icon of the site, sparking decades of debate. The excavators also noted the peculiar uniformity of abandonment. There were no collapsed walls suggesting conflict, no evidence of fire, and most strikingly, no human remains. Even the smaller personal items found at the site, a hairpin, a bone needle, a fragment of a comb, were few in number, as though the people had taken almost everything with them when they left. By the 1930s, the global economic depression and rising political tensions halted work at the site. For nearly 2 decades, the city was left to the wind again. In that time, local legends deepened. Some spoke of the builders who vanished into the sky. Others claimed that the ground itself swallowed the people, taking them to an underworld from which no one could return. When archaeologists returned in the 1950s, they brought improved methods. Stratigraphic excavation replaced the earlier habit of clearing large areas indiscriminately. Soil samples were taken, and radiocarbon dating applied to organic remains. These tests narrowed the city's construction period to a surprisingly short span, less than 30 years. Whatever the builders intended, they had worked quickly and with an intensity that suggested urgency. The 1957 season uncovered what appeared to be a ceremonial plaza at the heart of the city, paved with massive limestone slabs. In its center lay a shallow depression filled with fine sand. Some believed it was the base for a monumental statue that had never been erected. Others suggested it might have been used for astronomical observation, with the surrounding structures aligning with key points on the horizon during solstices and equinoxes. Despite these advances, the mystery of the abandonment deepened. Archival research in nearby regions yielded no records of the city, no mention in tax rolls, no reference in trade accounts, no chroniclers describing its rise or fall. It was as though it had been deliberately erased from the histories of those who might have known it. In the 1970s, aerial photography offered a new perspective. Images taken from above revealed subtle features, invisible at ground level, faint outlines of additional foundations buried beneath centuries of dust, suggesting the city's planned extent was far larger than the portion actually built. If completed, it might have rivaled the great capitals of the ancient world in scale. By the 1990s, satellite imaging confirmed these findings and added another layer to the puzzle. The site's orientation appeared to be astronomically precise. Its main avenues aligned not only with the cardinal directions but also with the rising and setting points of certain stars as they would have appeared in the sky over 1,000 years ago. This precision hinted at a culture with advanced astronomical knowledge or access to such knowledge from elsewhere. Today, the city is recognized as one of the most enigmatic archaeological sites on Earth. Official guides present the cautious consensus, a settlement abandoned due to environmental or political reasons. But for those who have walked its empty streets and traced the chisel marks on its half-carved pillars, that explanation feels incomplete. The rediscovery brought the city back into human memory, but it also brought a new question: how could something so large, so deliberate, vanish from history for so long? The known history offers the comfort of practical causes. The hidden truth lingers on the possibility that someone or something wanted the world to forget. The next step is to look closer at the physical evidence, the clues left in stone and soil, to see if the city itself can speak where its people no longer can. The city's bones are its most enduring testimony. Long after its people vanished, the walls, columns, and pathways remain, mute but eloquent in their precision. Every stone holds a decision, every joint a glimpse into the minds that shaped it. At first glance, the architecture appears monumental, but incomplete. Blocks of limestone and basalt, some weighing several tons, rest in tidy stacks beside half-built walls. The unfinished sections reveal construction methods, rarely visible in completed ancient cities. Channels carved into stone faces for ropes and levers, notches for wooden scaffolding, and tool marks crisp enough to catch the sunlight. The streets are unnervingly straight. They intersect at perfect right angles, dividing the city into large rectangular blocks. The main avenue runs directly along a cardinal axis, suggesting not only advanced surveying skills but also a symbolic intent. In many ancient cultures, such alignments reflected cosmological beliefs, linking human settlements to the order of the heavens. Closer inspection of the paving stones reveals something stranger. Certain slabs fit together with irregular but exacting precision. No mortar, no visible gap. Each stone cut to lock into its neighbors like a puzzle piece. This technique, found in only a handful of ancient sites worldwide, resists earthquakes and erosion far better than traditional masonry. How this community learned or inherited such a method remains unknown. Then there are the foundations. Some buildings appear modest in scale, but their bases are constructed to bear enormous weight, as if the upper stories were meant to rise far higher than the structures we see. The largest foundation block measures nearly 12 meters on a side, yet there is no evidence of what, if anything, ever stood upon it. Carved motifs decorate certain walls, though never in predictable sequences. Geometric patterns dominate, interlocking spirals, grids, and concentric circles, alongside occasional abstract shapes whose meaning has been lost. There is no depiction of human figure, no scenes of daily life, no rulers immortalized in stone. This absence is striking. In many ancient civilizations, public architecture was a canvas for propaganda. Here, it is as if the builders avoided leaving behind any narrative of themselves. One of the most puzzling features lies at the city's perimeter, a series of low stone platforms spaced at regular intervals. Too small for defensive towers, too broad for simple marker, they face outward toward the surrounding plain. Some researchers believe they may have been astronomical observation points. Others think they could have supported beacons, signaling to distant settlements now lost to time. Beneath the streets, archaeologists have traced narrow channels cut into the bedrock, part of a water management system that seems vastly overbuilt for the city's apparent population. The scale suggests planning for tens of thousands of inhabitants, far more than the number implied by the surviving structures. This mismatch feeds the theory that the city was intended as a grand capital or ceremonial center that never reached its full capacity. Material analysis of the stone reveals another layer of intrigue. While much of the limestone is local, the basalt blocks come from a quarry nearly 200 kilometers away. Transporting such massive stones across rugged terrain would have required extraordinary coordination and resources. That this effort was made for a city left unfinished raises the question, what was so important about this site that it justified such investment? Tool marks offer further clues. On the limestone, the chiseling is consistent with copper or bronze tools, but on the harder basalt, the cuts are so clean that some experts question whether such results could be achieved with the known technology of the era. The debate echoes similar controversies at other megalithic sites, where precision stonework seems to outstrip the tools attributed to the builder. In some of the half-built chambers, small caches of worked stone have been found, blocks shaped and polished but never placed. These stockpiles suggest construction was ongoing across multiple sectors simultaneously, rather than building sequentially from one area to the next. This reinforces the idea that work stopped suddenly, not gradually. Even the absence of certain features is telling. There are no completed defensive walls, no evidence of gates or watchtowers. Either the builders felt entirely secure, or the city's purpose was so specialized that fortifications were unnecessary. When the known history examines these clues, it frames them as evidence of an ambitious but ultimately failed project. Perhaps overreaching its resources, perhaps cut short by external pressures. But the hidden truth draws on the peculiar combination of scale, precision, and sudden halt to suggest something more deliberate. The lack of symbolic inscriptions could indicate that the builders intended the city to speak in another language, through geometry, orientation, and materials rather than words or images. If so, the city itself might be a kind of message, left for those who could interpret it. The astronomical alignments hint at a culture deeply attuned to celestial cycles, The oversized water channels and massive foundations point toward an intended population or event far beyond what the surviving structures could support. One theory posits that the city's incomplete state is intentional, that the construction was a ritual act, never meant to be finished in the conventional sense. In this reading, the work itself was the purpose, each stone laid as part of a ceremonial timeline tied to astronomical events. If the cycle ended, so too did the building. Yet this does not explain the abruptness. If the cessation were planned, one might expect a symbolic closure, a final marker, a dedicatory stone, a deliberate leaving of the last piece unfinished as a statement. None of these exist. Instead, the city feels like a sentence cut off mid-sentence, without punctuation. From an engineering perspective, the architecture displays both mastery and mystery. The builders clearly understood advanced surveying, masonry, and urban planning. They sourced and shaped materials with precision. They designed for durability and scale, and yet the ultimate goal of this skill remains out of reach for us, locked in the stones that never became walls, the streets that never saw the press of daily feet. The city's architecture is not just evidence, it is a riddle carved in stone, and like any riddle, it invites interpretation, shaped as much by the viewer's perspective as by the facts themselves. For some, it is a monument to human ambition cut short. For others, it is a silent message from a forgotten world, preserved in geometry and shadow. The next step is to look beyond the structures themselves, into the artifacts scattered among them. These smaller objects, tools, ornaments, fragments, might carry the most personal echoes of the vanished builder. If the city's architecture is its skeletal frame, the artifacts left behind are its fingerprints, small, tangible traces of human presence that survive long after the voices have gone. They are scattered in the dust between unfinished walls, tucked in abandoned workshops, buried beneath layers of wind-blown sand. Each one is a clue, but the more they are studied, the more they seem to resist a single coherent story. The first items recovered in the early excavations were modest fragments of clay pots, bone tools, and a handful of worked flints. At first glance, nothing extraordinary, until closer analysis revealed details that didn't belong. Some of the pottery was made with a tempering technique unknown in the surrounding region, involving crushed shell and a specific high-heat firing method that gave the vessels unusual durability. The style matched no known local tradition, hinting that either the builders imported the craftsmen or brought the knowledge from somewhere else entirely. Bronze chisels were found in a shallow trench near the city's central avenue. Their composition, an alloy of copper, tin, and traces of arsenic, was unusually pure, suggesting advanced metallurgical control. The tin source is particularly intriguing, as the nearest known deposits lie hundreds of kilometers away. The tools also show wear patterns consistent with working extremely hard stone, raising the same questions posed by the basalt blocks in the city's construction. One of the most enigmatic finds is a small carved pendant made of serpentine, shaped into an abstract spiral. It was discovered in what appeared to be a residential quarter, though no intact houses remain. The spiral motif is not unique to this site. It appears in various ancient cultures across the world, but its style here is subtly different, its proportions mathematically precise. Some researchers have speculated that it could represent a cosmological symbol, perhaps tied to the astronomical alignments in the city's layout. Others dismiss it as decorative, though the craftsmanship suggests otherwise. Textiles, usually absent from ancient sites due to decay, survived here in rare fragments thanks to the arid climate. Woven from plant fibers and dyed with a deep blue pigment, they display complex patterns that resemble no known weaving tradition in the surrounding area. Chemical analysis of the dye points to a plant not native to this region, once again implying long-distance contact or trade. Among the more surprising discoveries are a set of small, finely polished stone spheres, each about the size of a fist. They are perfectly spherical, an achievement requiring considerable skill without modern tools, and made from granite not found locally. The purpose of these spheres is unknown. Were they weights for a standard measurement system, ritual objects, game pieces? None show signs of wear, and they were found clustered in a single chamber, as if deliberately placed there. Even more puzzling is a narrow bronze tube, capped at one end, discovered buried beneath a layer of construction debris. Its interior was lined with a thin sheet of gold, far too fragile for structural purposes, yet carefully applied. This object has no known parallel in the region's archaeology, and speculation ranges from ceremonial container to part of a lost technological apparatus. Official reports downplay the more radical theories, but the absence of a clear explanation keeps the debate alive. Small caches of beads made from semi-precious stones, carnelian, lapis lazuli, and turquoise, have been found in multiple locations across the site. The origins of these stones are traceable to distant lands, the lapis from mines over 1,000 kilometers away, the turquoise from desert regions far to the north. This level of material diversity suggests either a well-established trade network or a migrating people bringing their possessions from many places. The city also yielded fragments of what appear to be writing implements, reed pens hardened with resin, and shallow stone palettes with traces of pigment. This is tantalizing, given the absence of any surviving written records. If the builders had a script, perhaps it was recorded on perishable materials, skins, papyrus, or wooden tablets that have long since vanished. One particularly haunting find emerged from the plaza at the city's heart, a shallow ceramic bowl containing a mixture of charred seeds. Botanical analysis identified several species, including one not found in the surrounding area, thought to be cultivated for both food and ritual use. The seeds had been burned deliberately, perhaps as an offering. This suggests that the city, incomplete though it was, may have been in active ceremonial use before its sudden abandonment. What stands out across all these artifacts is the tension between familiarity and anomaly. The known history frames them as the product of a culture at the crossroads of trade routes, borrowing techniques and materials from its neighbors. The hidden truth reads differently. The consistency of anomalies, foreign materials, advanced craftsmanship, unexplained objects, suggests a people whose connections or knowledge extended far beyond what their geography should allow. The scarcity of personal items remains one of the most telling details. In a lived-in city, excavations usually uncover a clutter of domestic life, broken tools, worn-out clothing, discarded pottery. Here, such traces are minimal. It is as if the inhabitants took most of their possessions when they left, packing up not in a panic, but in an organized withdrawal. What they left behind feels almost curated, as if chosen to remain. Some archaeologists have proposed that these artifacts form a kind of intentional record, a message encoded not in words, but in the selection of materials, techniques, and symbols. The perfect sphere, the precise spiral pendant, the unusual die, the foreign stones, each could be a deliberate marker of identity meant to be discovered by whoever came after. If this is the case, the city's unfinished state might not be the result of failure at all, but part of a design that we have yet to decipher. Yet this theory raises more questions than it answers. If the builders intended to leave a message, who was it for? Why abandon the site so completely? And why choose to communicate in ways that resist even our most advanced analytical tools? In the quiet of the excavation trenches, under the glare of a sun that has watched this place for centuries, such questions hang in the air like heat. The objects seem to invite speculation, then retreat into silence. To understand them fully, we must step beyond the tangible and into the realm of cultural and symbolic meaning. The artifacts may not only represent the practical life of the builders, they may embody their worldview, their myths, and the forces they believed governed the world. That search will take us into the realm of legends, the stories whispered by descendants, the myths preserved in distant lands, and the oral traditions that may hold echoes of the city that disappeared before it was born. Long before the city's unfinished walls were brushed free of sand, stories about its existence moved quietly among desert tribes, highland shepherds, and river traders. None of them used the city's modern archaeological name. Instead, they spoke of it as a place from another age, half remembered, half feared. One tale, recorded in the early years of exploration, tells of a city of waiting built by people who came from the horizon, carrying light in boxes. These strangers, the story says, laid stones in patterns that mirrored the stars but never roofed their houses, for they were waiting for a sign that never came. When the sign failed, they turned their faces to the east and vanished into the rising sun. In another version, told by nomadic elders, the place is called the Shadow of the Sky. Here the builders are described as giant-boned and long-lived, with voices that could call the rain. They began the city as a home for a great leader who was never born. The moment they learned this, the legend says, they walked away, leaving the stones as they were. Not all the stories are solemn. Among mountain villagers there is a trickster tale about a king who demanded a city of gold. His builders, clever but mischievous, constructed a shell of stone, promising that the gold would arrive with the last block. The king died before it did, and the builders slipped away laughing. While humorous, this story still centers on an unfinished city and a sudden, unexplained departure. What links these disparate accounts is the theme of interruption. None tell of the city's destruction in war, nor of natural disaster consuming it. Instead, they speak of a deliberate halt, sometimes mournful, sometimes purposeful, but always abrupt. When compared with other myths from the region, intriguing parallels emerge. Across a desert trade route hundreds of kilometers away, an oral tradition describes the gathering place of the first builders, where all tribes would meet once every great cycle to renew their bond with the sky. The location is never specified, but its description, broad avenues, unfinished towers, and a plaza marked by a central stone, bears uncanny resemblance to the site's layout. Further afield, in coastal communities with no direct connection to the desert, fishermen tell of a people who built a city for the tide. They worked day and night, but the tide they awaited never rose high enough to reach their walls. Frustrated, they departed, leaving the sea to find its own way. It is tempting to dismiss such a tale as pure fantasy, yet the metaphor of waiting for a cosmic or environmental event echoes through multiple traditions. In some of the more esoteric versions, the builders are not human at all. One central plateau legend speaks of those from the dark between the stars, who came to teach stone to remember its shape. They began their work but were summoned back to their home before they could finish. The city was left as a gift or a warning. Scholars often caution against reading too much into oral traditions, noting that centuries of retelling can transform events beyond recognition. Yet these stories preserve elements that align too closely with the archaeological record to be coincidence. The half-built structures, the sense of waiting for something that never came, the deliberate abandonment without destruction. The known history regards such tales as reflections of local identity, myths crafted to explain the visible mystery of the ruins. The hidden truth suggests the reverse, that the ruins may be the echo of an event so significant it imprinted itself on the cultural memory of far-flung peoples, surviving as metaphor long after the facts were lost. One striking element is the recurrence of celestial imagery. Whether the builders are said to mirror the stars, await a sign from the sky, or come from the dark between the stars, the heavens play a central role. This dovetails with the site's alignments and geometric patterns, suggesting that the myths may encode real astronomical associations. Linguists studying the oldest recorded versions of these stories have noted peculiarities in their structure, phrases and rhythms that seem out of place in the languages that preserve them. Some patterns resemble ceremonial speech from entirely different cultural spheres, implying that the myths may have been adopted from, or influenced by, a now vanished tradition. An especially cryptic fragment, preserved by a reclusive desert clan, describes the city as the bridge that touched neither shore. In their telling, the builders were weaving the world, a process interrupted before it was whole. The fragment offers no clear explanation, but the imagery evokes something vast and unfinished. A project meant to unite or connect realms. The most tantalizing connection comes from a river valley 2 weeks' travel from the site, where stone carvings depict a procession of figures carrying blocks toward a half-built wall. The carving is deeply weathered, its meaning disputed, but local legend identifies it as the work of the skybound, left when the measure changed. If authentic, it could represent an ancient memory of the city's halted construction, recorded visually rather than in words. Some researchers have attempted to synthesize the myths into a single narrative. A people, perhaps migrants, perhaps emissaries, arrive in a fertile desert basin. Guided by celestial markers, they begin building a city intended for a monumental purpose: coronation, cosmic alignment, ritual gathering. For reasons unknown, an omen, a failed prophecy, an environmental shift, they abandon the work. Their departure is orderly but absolute. Over time, the purpose is forgotten, but the interruption is remembered, echoing through song, story, and symbol. The challenge lies in separating metaphor from memory. Myths often speak in layered language, where events are refracted through symbols. The sign that never came might mean a failed astronomical event, a missed celestial alignment, or even the death of a leader before a planned inauguration. The measure changed could refer to an actual change in timekeeping systems or celestial observation, rendering the original plan obsolete. The weight of these stories grows when we consider that they exist in places far beyond the reach of the city's visible remains. This suggests that whatever happened here resonated across a wide region, perhaps through trade routes, perhaps through the movement of displaced peoples carrying the tale with them. In the modern world, where myths are often relegated to the realm of fantasy, it is easy to dismiss them as quaint relics. Yet standing in the shadow of the city's silent walls, with its streets aligned to vanished stars, the old stories feel less like inventions and more like keys to a door we have not yet learned how to open. The next step in this investigation will not come from the stones or the stories alone, but from science itself. For in the last 2 decades, new dating techniques, satellite imaging, and material analysis have begun to strip away the layers of uncertainty, revealing facts that align with the myths in ways no one anticipated. For more than a century, the city remained a riddle framed in stone and sand, a puzzle that seemed immune to definitive answers. Archaeologists mapped its streets, measured its walls, and cataloged its artifacts, but the deeper questions: why it was abandoned mid-construction, who its builders were, and what purpose it served, remained stubbornly unresolved. Then, in the last 2 decades, science began to sharpen its tools. The results have not only refined the timeline, but in some cases brought the myths into sharper focus. It began with a re-evaluation of the city's age. Earlier dating efforts relied on the conventional method of comparing artifact styles to those from surrounding regions, producing estimates that varied wildly, sometimes by as much as 1,000 years. With the advent of accelerator mass spectrometry, AMS radiocarbon dating, researchers could test organic materials directly. Charred seeds from the plaza, wooden support beams from collapsed scaffolding, and even traces of plant fiber embedded in mud bricks were subjected to analysis. The results clustered tightly around a single period. The city was begun in a narrow window of less than 60 years, then abandoned almost immediately thereafter. This compressed timeline reframed the problem. It was no longer a slow decline or drawn-out abandonment. It was a project halted in its infancy, as if a command had been given and instantly obeyed. This fits eerily well with oral traditions describing an abrupt sign or change of measure that ended the work. Another breakthrough came from high-resolution satellite imagery. While the city's visible ruins cover a modest area, sensors capable of detecting subsurface features revealed something unexpected: faint outlines of additional structures extending far beyond the excavated zone. These buried features appear to form concentric rings around the central city, suggesting that what we see today was only the inner core of a much larger plan. The outer rings, never built beyond their foundations, indicate that the builders were working outward from a center, a pattern often associated with ceremonial or astronomical cities. When the work stopped, it froze not just individual buildings, but the entire expanding design. Ground-penetrating radar confirmed the presence of large, unexcavated pits filled with debris just outside the city limits. Inside them were massive stone blocks, quarried and partially shaped, waiting to be moved. Some blocks were identical in dimensions to those already in place, implying they were part of a highly standardized building program. Whatever stopped the construction did so before these blocks could even be hauled to their intended locations. Perhaps the most surprising evidence emerged from isotopic analysis of the basalt used in key structures. Geologists traced the stone's origin to a site more than 200 kilometers away, across difficult terrain. Transporting such heavy material over that distance would have required a level of organization and logistical capacity rivaling that of the most advanced civilizations of the time. The fact that this effort was invested, and then abandoned, underscores the scale of the interruption. Scientific testing has also touched on the city's mysterious artifacts. The perfect granite spheres, once thought to be decorative curiosities, were subjected to 3D laser scanning. The results revealed that their deviation from perfect sphericity is less than a fraction of a millimeter, a precision difficult to achieve even with modern equipment. Microscopic wear patterns suggest they were rotated in some kind of cradle or mount, though no such apparatus has been found. This has fueled speculation that they were components of a larger mechanism, perhaps astronomical in function. Material analysis of the serpentine spiral pendant revealed a surface coating of an organic compound that had long since degraded but left chemical traces. The compound appears to have been a binding medium for gold leaf, indicating that the pendant was once partially gilded. This detail, invisible to the naked eye, lends weight to interpretations of the object as ceremonial rather than merely decorative. The bronze tube with the gold lining, so puzzling when first discovered, underwent microstructural analysis. It revealed signs of intense localized heating, suggesting it may have been used in processes involving extreme temperature. No one can say exactly what those processes were, but its engineering sophistication exceeds that of known regional metallurgy at the time. Scientific data has even intersected with mythology in unexpected ways. The charred seeds from the plaza, dated to the very moment the city was abandoned, belong partly to a species that blooms in cycles of roughly 60 years. In certain regional traditions, this plant is associated with renewal rites timed to astronomical events. Could it be that the city's construction was tied to such a cycle, and that some miscalculation or missed event rendered the project meaningless? Astronomers have joined the investigation, using computer models to roll the sky back thousands of years. They found that the city's main avenue, now oriented toward a seemingly unremarkable horizon, would have pointed directly at the rising of a bright star during the period of construction. But the star's position was shifting due to precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis. Within a human lifetime, the alignment would have failed. If the city's purpose was linked to this celestial event, its abandonment might have been a matter of necessity rather than choice. This scientific convergence, radiocarbon, dating narrowing the timeline, satellite imagery expanding the scope, isotopic analysis revealing distant origins, and astronomical modeling showing lost alignments, has begun to weave a picture that feels eerily familiar. It mirrors in data points and measurements the shapes already traced in myth. The sign that never came could be the missing star. The measure changed might be the moment the alignment slipped beyond recovery. Of course, science also brings its own cautions. Not every result points in a single direction. Alternative interpretations remain. The work could have halted due to political upheaval, sudden resource loss, or even epidemic. Yet the fact that these hard data points repeatedly brush against the edges of ancient stories suggests that those stories may carry more than metaphor. They may be distorted reflections of real events. The known history once framed the site as an ambitious but failed local project, doomed by practical obstacles. The hidden truth emerging from modern science is more complex. This may have been a deliberately timed undertaking tied to cycles of nature and the heavens, requiring immense organization and far-reaching resources, and it ended not in chaos, but in a decisive, possibly premeditated halt. The implications are profound. If the city was abandoned due to a celestial or cyclical change, it suggests a level of astronomical awareness far beyond what was once attributed to the region's culture. It also hints that the builders may have been part of a larger network, perhaps a tradition spanning centuries and landscapes dedicated to constructing such timed monuments. Science has brought us closer to the bones of the truth, but it has not yet given us its flesh. For that we must look outward again, beyond the walls, beyond the myths, to see whether other sites in the world bear the same fingerprints. Once the city's story was reframed through the lens of science, researchers began to notice something strange. Its blueprint was not unique. Scattered across the globe are other sites, some half-finished, some inexplicably abandoned, that share certain structural patterns, orientations, and ceremonial features with the desert city. These similarities, once dismissed as coincidence, now form a growing web of possible connections. The first comparison came from halfway across the continent. Deep in a wind-swept plateau, archaeologists had long puzzled over an unfinished stone complex with wide avenues radiating from a central plaza. Like the desert city, it showed signs of careful astronomical alignment, specifically toward the heliacal rising of a bright star. Its outermost rings were never completed. Enormous foundation blocks lay where they had been cut, their surfaces still bearing the chisel marks of the workers who vanished. Radiocarbon dating placed its construction within a century of the desert site's own brief life. Further afield, in the high valleys of a distant mountain range, a series of stone platforms lie aligned to a point on the horizon that no longer holds astronomical significance. Their builders had begun raising tall pillars around the central space, but left them standing like frozen sentinels, unfinished and unadorned. Local myths there speak of a city for the skies turning that was abandoned when the watcher fell. The phrasing is eerily similar to tales from the desert basin. Then there is the enigmatic site on an island coast, where basalt causeways lead to massive stone foundations, each with sockets for uprights that were never set in place. Marine archaeologists found that these foundations line up with the setting position of the same star once targeted by the desert city's main avenue. The match is not exact, oceanic latitude changes the angle, but the intent appears deliberate. Patterns began to emerge. Many of these unfinished monuments are arranged in concentric layouts, with work progressing outward from a ceremonial core. Most show evidence of massed labor and standardized building blocks, suggesting centralized planning. And almost all seem tied to celestial markers that, due to precession or other astronomical cycles, would shift out of alignment within a human generation. The question became unavoidable: were these isolated bursts of inspiration or fragments of a single far-reaching tradition? Some scholars argue for a shared origin, a network of builders, engineers, and astronomer priests, traveling vast distances to create these timed monuments. This would explain not only the similar designs, but also the precision in astronomical alignments and the uniformity in construction methods. If true, it suggests that the desert city was just one chapter in a larger coordinated project spanning continents. Others caution that parallel development is possible. Different cultures watching the same sky might independently arrive at similar conclusions about sacred alignments and cyclical timing. But this explanation struggles to account for the uncanny resemblance in unfinished layouts, abandoned building blocks, and abrupt halts. One of the more provocative leads comes from comparative linguistics. In three separate regions, thousands of kilometers apart, Ritual phrases preserved in oral tradition use nearly identical metaphorical language to describe the halting of a great work. The measure changed, the watcher fell, the star went away. Whether these are cultural borrowings or independent expressions, the recurrence of this imagery is difficult to ignore. In some cases, physical artifacts provide stronger links. A fragment of a carved stone panel from a South American highland site shows a robed figure holding a spiral pendant remarkably similar to the serpentine spiral found in the desert city. The carving's style is distinct, but the object it depicts is unmistakable. In both cases, the spiral is shown with a central point, perhaps indicating a specific astronomical focus. Likewise, bronze tubes lined with precious metals, rare and technologically advanced for their time, have turned up in two other unfinished sites. Their functions remain as mysterious as that of the desert city's example, but their presence hints at shared technological knowledge or symbolic significance. Some researchers now suspect that these sister sites may not only share a purpose, but also share a synchronized timeline. By mapping the dates of abandonment and correlating them with astronomical data, a startling pattern emerges. Many were halted within a few decades of each other, during a period when certain bright stars were shifting out of key positions in the sky. This raises the possibility that the builders, whether connected by trade, religion, or some deeper network, were responding to a shared celestial event. It is here that the contrast between known history and hidden truth becomes stark. Known history frames these sites as local anomalies, each with its own unrelated failure or famine, political collapse. The hidden truth points to a broader, possibly coordinated cessation, a choice made across vast distances, perhaps in recognition of a moment the builders had awaited for generations, only to find it slipping away. The implications extend beyond archaeology. If these sites were part of a single tradition, then that tradition possessed not only advanced engineering skills, but also a form of long-term planning that is rare in human history. They may have operated on a timescale measured not in years or reigns, but in centuries, planning projects to coincide with celestial alignments and abandoning them when those alignments failed. Even more intriguingly, some sites appear to have been repurposed after abandonment. Later cultures built atop the foundations, reusing the stones but ignoring the original alignments. In doing so, they erased the visible purpose but may have inadvertently preserved the core structures, leaving clues for modern science to rediscover. Satellite imagery continues to reveal new candidates for this global pattern. In arid valleys, along hidden jungle plateaus, and beneath shallow coastal waters, shapes emerge, avenues, plazas, uncannily similar to those already known. Some are so faint that only the most sensitive sensors can detect them, others are barely concealed beneath soil or vegetation. If these are confirmed as part of the same phenomenon, then the desert city is not an isolated enigma, it is a central piece in a much larger, more mysterious puzzle. What remains unanswered is the motive. Why build on such a grand scale for such a fleeting moment of alignment? Why invest immense resources into monuments destined to be abandoned? And most haunting of all, what did the builders expect to happen when the alignments occurred? The search for sister sites is ongoing, but each discovery sharpens the sense that we are glimpsing the edge of a vanished worldview, one that saw human architecture as a mirror of the cosmos and the act of building as part of a cycle greater than any single generation. We are left with a tantalizing possibility that the builders were not simply creating places to live, worship, or govern, but were attempting to anchor time itself, to bind a moment in the heavens to a place on earth. When the sky moved on, they moved on too, leaving their cities in mid-breath. And so the path forward leads in two directions at once, deeper into the ground, where unexcavated stones may still speak, and outward across the globe, where forgotten foundations wait to be recognized as kin to the desert city. In both cases, the journey is far from over. The story of the city that disappeared mid-construction is, at first glance, a historical anomaly. It begins with the measured strokes of archaeology, dates, maps, layers of soil, and ends in the realm of speculation and wonder. Yet, as we have seen, this is not a story about one place. It is about a pattern, a pulse, a shared rhythm that once connected distant landscapes under a single sky. In known history, cities are abandoned for reasons we understand: resource scarcity, conquest, disaster, political collapse. The chronicles of human civilization are full of such endings, written in fire and dust. But here, the evidence whispers something different. The abandonment was not a messy collapse, but a clean severance, a purposeful withdrawal. There is no sign of violent destruction, no burned layers, no scattering of belongings. The workers did not flee. They finished what they were doing that day and never returned. The hidden truth, as suggested by the science and the parallels we have uncovered, points to an intention, an understanding of time and place that transcended the needs of survival or empire. The builders may have been pursuing an alignment between earth and sky, a fleeting moment when architecture could mirror the heavens with absolute precision. When the moment passed, the purpose was gone, and so too was the will to finish. We can imagine the day it happened. Perhaps the last blocks had been shaped, but not set in place. Perhaps the bronze tube lay ready for use, its gold lining gleaming in the sun. The great plaza was prepared for a ceremony that would never come. High above, the star they had been watching for decades drifted ever so slightly out of place, a shift invisible to most eyes, but undeniable to those who measured the heavens. Somewhere, an elder priest or astronomer marked the change and gave the order. Work stopped. The dream was over. The abandonment would not have felt like failure to them. In their world view, the city's purpose had been bound to a cosmic event. Once that event was missed or rendered impossible, the city was no longer needed. To continue building would have been meaningless. In this light, the unfinished walls and empty plazas are not signs of ruin but of fulfillment, just not in a way we would recognize. When we place the desert city alongside its sister sites, the highland platforms, the island causeways, the plateau avenues, the picture becomes clearer. These were not isolated experiments. They were chapters in a global tradition, perhaps linked by trade routes, shared myths, or a traveling class of master builders. Each site may have been a different attempt at the same cosmic synchronization. Each failed in the same way, not through incompetence or disaster, but because the alignment they sought slipped away. What is striking is the discipline with which they stopped. Our own world often clings to projects long after their meaning has eroded, pouring resources into monuments to pride or politics. But the builders of these cities walked away without hesitation. They obeyed a principle we do not fully understand, one that placed the rhythm of the cosmos above the permanence of stone. The desert city's silence is thus not an absence but a statement. It tells us that the builders could conceive of time not as a river flowing endlessly forward, but as a circle, a cycle with moments worth shaping entire landscapes for, and others in which the stones themselves could wait unfinished until the stars returned. This realization forces us to reconsider our definition of civilization. We often measure advancement by permanence, how long a city stands, how much survives the centuries. But here is a culture, or perhaps a network of cultures, that may have measured its success by impermanence, by the precision of a moment, rather than the endurance of a monument. The known history will record the desert city as a mystery, an unfinished dream in the sands. The hidden truth, if we allow ourselves to glimpse it, is that it was completed in the only way that mattered to its makers. It stood ready for the alignment, and when that alignment was lost, its role in the cycle was complete. And yet questions remain, questions as vast as the horizon. Were these builders connected by a shared origin, or was this a parallel awakening in separate corners of the ancient world? What knowledge allowed them to track celestial movements with such accuracy? And most haunting of all, what did they believe would happen when the alignment was perfect? Was it a signal, a summoning, a doorway between worlds? Or was it simply a way to honor the cosmos, to mirror its dance on the surface of the earth. As we stand among the unfinished walls today, it is easy to see only what is missing, but if we listen, really listen, the silence becomes full. The half-laid stones are not ruins, they are messages frozen in the moment they became unnecessary. The tools left behind are not signs of interruption, they are relics of a decision made with conviction. This is the kind of mystery that does not yield to a single answer. It demands that we hold two truths at once, that we may never know the full story, and that the search itself changes how we see the past. Every test, every excavation, every scan of distant landscapes brings us closer to the builders, not as strangers from an incomprehensible time, but as people who looked up at the same sky and saw patterns worth shaping their world around. And so, the city remains caught between past and present, between the known and the hidden. It will never be finished, and perhaps that is its truest form. It reminds us that not all human endeavors are meant to last forever. Some are meant to exist only in the shadow of a moment, as fleeting as the star that slipped beyond its walls. The search for its meaning will go on, new sister sites will be found, more data will be gathered. Perhaps one day we will understand the full scope of this ancient rhythm, this pulse that echoed across continents. Until then, the desert city will stand as it always has, unfinished yet complete in ways we have yet to grasp. In the wind over its stones, in the lines of its abandoned avenues, we can still feel the weight of that choice. A civilization did not vanish here, it stepped away mid-breath, leaving the rest for us to wonder. In the quiet hours before sunrise, the desert city takes on a strange presence. The air is still, the shadows long, and the unfinished stones seem to breathe in the half-light. Standing there, it is easy to feel that the builders have only just stepped away, their footprints fading into the sands. The city has not been reclaimed by time so much as paused, like a held note waiting for the next movement in a symphony that has not yet begun. Known history is full of endings. Empires fall, temples are buried, roads vanish beneath grass, but this city does not feel like an ending. It feels like an open question, one whose answer has been waiting perhaps for someone willing to see beyond the ruins. The hidden truth we have pursued through this journey is not about a single alignment or event, but about a mindset, a worldview in which human effort is willingly surrendered when its cosmic purpose has passed. It challenges the very instincts we associate with civilization to build, to expand, to endure. Here, endurance was not the goal, precision was. And when precision was lost, continuation became meaningless. This makes the desert city and its sister sites unsettling to us. They expose a blind spot in our understanding of human ambition. We tend to assume that any culture capable of large-scale engineering will seek permanence as a form of immortality. These builders did not. They appear to have measured success, not in centuries of habitation, but in the perfect synchronization of stone and star. Once that moment passed, so too did the need for the city itself. Some scholars have suggested that the decision to abandon the city was not sudden, but anticipated, that the builders knew from the very first block that they might walk away before completion. In this light, every foundation stone, every carved avenue was not just a step toward an imagined future, but a calculated gesture within a finite window of opportunity. The city's incompletion, then, was not a failure, but the fulfillment of a different kind. And perhaps this is why the place retains its power. Because unlike so many ancient sites that crumble slowly into anonymity, this one ended abruptly and deliberately, leaving its bones intact. It has no later layers, no messy centuries of reuse. It remains a pure artifact of a single moment in time, unmarred by the footsteps of those who came after. In walking its empty plazas, you can almost hear the echoes of that choice. The tools left on the ground, the blocks mid-placement, the work songs cut short. You can imagine the workers glancing up at the sky, seeing the shift that meant the end, and quietly accepting it. There is dignity in that image, a sense of human beings in harmony with something larger than themselves, even if it meant erasing the purpose of years of labor in an instant. The sister sites add weight to this image. They tell us that the desert city's story is not unique, that across mountains, coasts, and plateaus, other builders made the same choice under different skies. It is a thread that binds distant cultures into a single mystery, a mystery that if solved would rewrite our understanding of ancient global connections. But maybe solving it is not the point. Maybe its true value lies in what it teaches us about the limits of our own assumptions. The builders did not leave behind written explanations. They left us the silence between the stones, the absence of completion. In that silence, we are invited to listen for meanings that history books cannot record. Some believe the alignments they sought were tied to rituals of renewal, points in time when heaven and earth drew close. Others suspect they were part of a system for measuring cycles far longer than human lives, the kind of cosmic calendar that could only be maintained across generations. Still, others hold to the possibility that the alignments were meant as messages, beacons for something or someone beyond our world. None of these theories can be proven, and perhaps that is why the city continues to grip the imagination. Without a definitive answer, we are left to wrestle with our own interpretations, to project our own longings onto the stones, and in doing so we connect across thousands of years to the people who once stood here, eyes lifted to the same star. When we finally step away from the site, leaving the avenues and plazas to the wind, the lesson we carry is not just about engineering or astronomy. It is about perspective, about how a civilization can choose to end something not because it is broken, but because its moment has passed, about how meaning can be tied to a fleeting instant, and how beauty can reside in impermanence. The city that disappeared mid-construction is, in truth, a city that fulfilled its purpose without ever finishing its form. Its stones stand as a reminder that not all legacies are measured in monuments that last forever. Some are measured in the courage to walk away, and so the desert keeps its secret. The sky changes, the stars shift. The city waits not for us to rebuild it, but for us to understand why it was never meant to be complete. Perhaps somewhere in the far future the stars will return to their former positions. Perhaps another generation will come to this place, tools in hand, ready to finish what was begun. Or perhaps the city's role in the cycle is over forever, and all that remains is for us to learn from its silence. In the end, that may be its greatest gift, to remind us that the measure of a civilization is not only in what it creates, but in what it can let go of. The desert city let go. The rest is up to us.